VinePair's New York City headquarters, I'm Adam Teeter.
And I'm Joanna Sciarrino.
And in Seattle, Washington, I'm Zach Jabal.
And this is the VinePair Podcast. Zach, man, we missed you at BCB, and since we got to drink fun stuff, why don't you tell us what you drank first?
Yeah, BarConf in Brooklyn looked like a lot of fun.
Yeah, man.
Maybe next year. There's this like ever growing number of very cool like cocktail bar festivals that I've never been to. So got to work on that, I suppose. Get out of my northwest corner of the U.S. I never even did Tales of the Cocktail up in Vancouver, which is obviously very close to me, but haven't made it up there. So yeah, no. What have I been drinking? I think probably the most interesting thing that I had in the last week or so was well, I think two things. One, I had a really interesting white wine from a winery up in kind of pretty far northern California in the North Yuba Mountains area, from a winery called Frenchtown Farms, and it was a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Roussanne, which are not two varieties I've seen blended together very often. But it's very cool. The whole, it's like one of these things where you just realize sometimes. I actually had the opportunity to visit that area a few years ago. I didn't go to this winery, but went to another winery there. And it's one of those wineries where it's like, man, California is enormous and has so many different kind of agricultural and viticultural areas. And this is like, not completely different from other places I've been, but is just very remote. Like I lost cell phone service out in the vineyard, and you're kind of just like I think you're technically in the what do they call it? The state of Jefferson. They're a pretend breakaway republic up there in the north part of California, right. And it's just like. So it was miles away from, like a world away from the glitz and glamour of, kind of a little further down in Napa and Sonoma. But it's an interesting wine. It was definitely, showed a lot of kind of, it's a natural wine. It's definitely on the funkier side, but not overwhelmingly so. And maybe it's just because like we have an apple tree in our yard and like it's dropping apples like crazy. And I'm just like constantly surrounded by the smell of like, partially fermented apples, but it had a little bit of that sense to it, which I kind of dig in white wine from time to time. So yeah, it was good.
Cool, man.
Do you guys have any standout things at BCB or anything else that's been like a highlight?
Well, I'll let Joanna talk about BCB.
I think I had more gin and tonics yesterday than I've had in my entire life for some reason. Oof. I feel like gin was a really big focus.
There was a lot of gin there.
A lot of gin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But outside of BCB, I this past weekend we stopped by Torch and Crown Brewery in Manhattan and Soho, and I know Adam, you had chatted with John Dantzler right last year, when they opened up. So we got some beers to go from there. I really enjoyed a saison that they had right now, and we got a sour that was just a little too sour for me. Getting that a lot. I don't know if it's just
like not
just really acidic for me. Anyway, maybe I'm just getting old.
Yeah, I have noticed as I've gotten older that my tolerance for very sour things has decreased for sure.
Oh my God, this now just sounds like an aging. It's a podcast.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is that we're not reaching a younger demographic. I love really sour things. Please,
this podcast brought to you by AARP.
It's doing enough, man.
And Tums.
And Tums. Yeah. I love a Tums.
Gotta travel with them.
There was a lot of gin and tonic though at BCB, and I also agree with you, Joanna, that sours. I mean, for me, it's always been sour beers, but it's been forever that I'll just be like, "Oh, can't do those." Like I can have one, and then I'm like, I'm not enjoying these. Like these, I don't want to fight with my beverage. Yeah. I thought BCB was a good time. It was definitely like less big brands than have been there in the past. So I think it was missing some of like the larger brands. Actually, it was kind of nice. There was more sort of mid-tier and then emerging brands, which is cool. They kind of got like more of the spotlight, which I think is always great for those brands because, more people obviously will then stop and see them, and still had a really great amount of talent in terms of the bartender community that was out, making drinks. And it was just, you could tell everyone was just like really happy to be there. And I think they did it, as safely as they could. Right. So multiple vaccine checks, you had to check when you first checked in, then again, when we picked up our credentials, then again, as we were coming into the venue. So it felt safe and everyone had their masks on for the most part, besides when they were tasting. And a lot of people spent a lot of time outside. So it was cool. And then the other stuff, what else did I do this past weekend? Oh, my parents were in town. So, so we had some fun drinks. I got to have, I made some cocktails. I made my parents the last word, which they'd never had before, which was fun to share with them. And we went out for dinner one night to, again, a place I probably talked about before, Lorena Pastificio, which was just a great meal with really, really cool wine. And I got to have my parents have Kos for the first time.
Oh, cool.
Which was awesome. We had their orange wine, which was delicious.
Oh, I've never had that.
Oh, it was great. It was really great. And yeah, then just kind of hung out at home and had some fun times with them. And then it was all BCB yesterday. And I'm trying to think if there was like one or two booths that really stood out. The one thing I will say that I had that I'd never had before, and I'm saying, maybe that rum chata. I'd never had rum chata before. And it was actually pretty good. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I was a little suspect. I was like, "Oh, what's this gonna be?" And then I tried it, and they shook it for myself. Actually, myself and Aaron Goldfarb both walked over and had it together.
Well, this is like right up Aaron's alley. It's basically just eggnog.
And Aaron loves an eggnog, and Aaron also loves like a spirit that none of us in New York are talking about. Because it's and so we walked over and we were talking to the team and. They're like, "Yeah, you want to try rum chata?" And we're like, "Yeah," and it was pretty delicious. And then they brought out fresh nutmeg and
nice.
Apparently they said that like it's one of the largest. Rum chata is one of the largest purchasers of cream in America or milk in Wisconsin. I don't know. I didn't get the full facts, so no one quote me on this. But,
or you might have had some rum chata before they told you the facts, so recollections may differ.
But that was cool. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else that was just like really. I mean, there was so much good stuff, but just like stuff that I was like, wow. I don't know. I spent some time on my bingo card at the Sazerac table. They had a pretty fun ploy that turned out to be a ruse, which was apparently if you tried 10 different things, you would get a taste of Pappy. And so Josh and I were like, "Yeah, we're gonna do this," and like little tastes, right? Come on,
yeah.
And then we get to the end of it, and they're like, "Oh, there's no Pappy." we messed up. We actually don't have Pappy today.
Oh, they should have been like, "Yeah, someone drank it all already."
Yeah, like we had that yesterday. They're like, but we do have George T. Stagg," and I was like, "That's fine." I mean,
I'm okay. I'll take it,
peeps. It was pretty fun. It was actually pretty humorous, but I did get to try a lot of really interesting things in that portfolio, including an Indian whiskey, which I'd never had before.
Interesting.
Into the U.S. Yeah,
was it? So it wasn't Amrut. It was another one.
Just another one.
Okay.
And now the name escapes me. But they're starting to bring it to the U.S. I guess Sazerac has part ownership of it.
Oh, okay, cool.
And yeah, it was a really interesting whiskey that they had one that was like super aged, like I think, and they said they're going to sell it in the U.S. for like $300 a bottle. It was interesting stuff, like really, really, really interesting stuff. So yeah, cool. I mean that was what I've been up to. But Zach, you've got today's topic for us. What are we going to chat about?
Well, so this has kind of been prompted by a couple of things. I think it's been prompted. This topic has been prompted by some press releases, and that they're sometimes good fodder for podcast topics for me, and for you guys too, of course, and also Adam, we were talking about this before we recorded a little bit, like by travels and kind of the just what we see in the wine space in particular. And the sort of thing I wanted to get both of your perspectives on is I recently got a press release about a new Napa Valley wine project. And it's, keeping in the sort of a lot of what you associate with what historically you might associate with Napa Valley. It's Cabernet Sauvignon focused. It's got 3 very high profile, long, well-established winemaking consultants attached to it, kind of eye-popping price tag, et cetera, et cetera. But what's interesting to me in this is it's the first thing I've seen in a while that really its whole marketing pitch is like, we're not going to tell you, oh, it comes from this and that vineyard. We're not going to extol the quality of the grapes. What we're going to focus on is we're paying these very well-known winemakers a lot of money, presumably, to put to make this wine. And we think that you, the audience for these wines, which granted is very small and very elite, are going to be more interested in that than in a recitation of the, the specific values of the site or sites where the grapes came from. And granted, it's still Napa Valley wine. It's not like they're making it in the middle of North Yuba, California, say. But what was interesting to me, and I wanted to get your take on, is we have been in this period of time in wine for the last decade or so, if not longer, where everyone from producers in the most established regions to some of the most new or obscure, have focused so much in their communications to the public, to the press, to the trade about the nuances of their site, of their terroir, of the value of this specific plot of land where their grapes come from, and have really kind of diminished the importance of their winemaker in a lot of cases and in the winemaking. And I'm wondering, do you guys think that there is has that pendulum swung too far? Or are we at the point now where that conversation is so tipped towards the discussion about, the place, the vineyard, the place where the grapes come from, and so little is said about the winemaking and the winemaker? Because that's a little bit how I felt. And this, not that these wines particularly are, I'm not, ponying up $8,000 for these wines or whatever, but there was something about that resonated with me, and I thought, it's interesting. Maybe there is an audience for a sort of, I don't know about anti-terroir, but sort of a non-terroir focused wine.
I do think that there is definitely a move towards more about, everything starts in the vineyard and less about who makes it. And I definitely think there is somewhat of a tension there amongst, now we're going to get really into it, right? And going to piss some people off. So let's go. So I think that there is a tension here that exist amongst trained winemakers. So people who either have gone and gotten a degree, right? So they've really worked their asses off, and they've gone and gotten the masters, and some have gotten PhDs and really have learned a lot in terms of winemaking at UC Davis or one of the other great enology schools, or they have apprenticed for a really long time under other winemakers to really learn. And I think you can always sense a little bit of annoyance in their voices when they talk about this topic, because it's we give a fuck about the site too, motherfuckers.
Yeah.
We care about it too, but we also believe that then our skill is the best steward of that site.
Yeah.
But I think that the site has become, so much more talked about than it used to. And that has then fed the movement of okay, so then, John, Jim, Jane, who can go and just buy that fruit, crush it, and it's going to be just as good as if someone who actually trained had made it. And I don't think that's true. I think that's pretty much crap. And we've seen that reflected in a lot of wines that get made by sort of novices. I can bake bread, right? I learned how to do it in the pandemic, but it's nowhere as good as bread that's been baked by a, world-renowned baker who, even if I use the same ingredients, right?
Yeah.
And so but I think that a lot of what we're seeing is that discussion of site, because we are seeing so many, I don't mean to use it. I know, just come at me. Amateurs who are making wine and then selling it at the same price as people who have really perfected their craft.
Yeah.
And that's a little bullshit.
And you think that they're using the land, the terroir to sell it, these amateurs?
Yeah, they use that story, right? So it's well, the fruit comes from this amazing site. So it's look, I can go to the farmer's market and buy the same caliber, fruit, vegetables, etc., on Saturday in Fort Greene that the chefs in Brooklyn go and buy. I just don't go as early in the morning because, come on, I'm sleeping in. But then when I do go, so maybe I don't get the best stuff, but I can get that caliber of produce, right? When I go home, I like to think of myself as a pretty decent home chef. I like to cook, I like to play around, but I would never charge you $30 a plate for it, right?
Sure.
I'll charge you you have to deal with my company. But besides
you got to help clean up.
Yeah. But besides that, I'm not charging. And I do think that that's what's been so crazy in wine is that there's a lot of people who have gotten into it who, are able to have access. Look, like at the end of the day, the person selling the fruit just wants to sell the fruit, right? And so you can get access to some of these. I mean, except for the really, really, really renowned vineyards, we would say like the Premier Cru vineyards, Ground Cru vineyards of the U.S. There's some great sites that you can be a quote unquote hobbyist and you can get access, and you can have a graphic designer friend who can make you a label, and you can go buy bottles, and you can then be on the market at the same price. And there's some distributors who I would argue, have made a career in representing hobbyists, right? Because there's a lot of like sort of thirst for hobbyists. I mean, look, you guys those who listen to the podcast a lot know that I'm using hobbyist as a code word for a wine movement that starts with the word N and ends with "atral." But I'm just saying that like
craft winemakers,
exactly.
Uh-huh.
And so I think that you can't tell the story of the winemaker as much, because besides the fact that like, I get it, you love wine, we all love wine, you're passionate about it, it, you can't tell the same story that a winemaker with decades of experience, or even a winemaker straight out of school, but who has gone through the ropes of learning how to make wine and done the work can. And so that has shifted the narrative. That's my thought process. I think I've talked a lot. So Joanna, what do you think?
Well, I have a question. So Zach, you said that you got this press release about this, and I don't know, kind of, I'm wondering if we know of other instances of this happening, or if this is kind of like feels kind of gimmicky to me a little bit, like you're using these names. And now after hearing Adam chat, I'm wondering if we're swinging towards like, it seems like both. You need both things, right?
Yes.
For really good wine.
Oh, for sure.
The grapes, the fruit, and then the winemaker as well. Like you can't really, unless we think we can make the case for like a winemaker turning shit grapes into really good wine.
No, I don't think you would necessarily say that, but I think that including these specific winemakers who were named in this project, their reputation was built in the 80s and 90s and 2000s because they were, this sort of cadre of what they called like flying winemakers, right? Like they had projects all over the world. They would make the wine, or at least consult on the winemaking, and kind of the thing you were frankly paying them for if you were a proprietor was just sort of the reputation and the imprimatur that they lent to your project, their specific know-how and their technique. And frankly, like just the cachet that it gave you. And so that isn't gone. I mean, we see, people from, we certainly have seen plenty of examples of winemakers now who, launch multiple projects, who move from wine to wine. I think it's just that we there was like take someone like Dave Finney, right? Dave Finney, who founded The Prisoner. Mm-hmm. There's someone who, when The Prisoner was founded, he was lauded as like sort of this, he was a person who, understood maybe the winemaking side of it to some extent, but the marketing side of it, the idea of creation of a brand, he created this iconic brand out of nothing, sold it obviously, and went on to do other things. And like somewhere along the way that became, in sort of elite wine circles, and most of them, that wine and that concept became taboo, right? It was anathema. This is the opposite of what you should do, right? That the greatest winemakers are people who, maybe you never even know their names. They were people who, the vision of a great winemaker was someone who, I guess ideally kind of like had their own little patch of land, and they planted weird, obscure varieties, and they made these wines that were, just had no commercial purpose to them. And they were like, they were this sort of
very romantic.
This sort of tortured genius kind of notion. And I mean, I've had some of those wines, and some of them are great, and some of them suck, and a lot of them are in between. And I guess I think that just the thing that was refreshing to me about this notion, and I have been trying to push back against a little bit when I talk to people, is this idea that like wine is not a natural product in the sense that it does not occur naturally, right? Mm-hmm. Like all wine is unnatural in the sense that like you can't just go into nature and gather wine, right? You can pick grapes. You can pick grapes, and if you pick grapes and press them, you will have a fermentation, and then you'll have vinegar or something that's rancid. Like wine is an arrested part of the breakdown of grapes, and we love it. It's great. But no, it's not natural, any meaningful. I mean, in a true sense of that word, none of it. Some of it is maybe more unnatural than others. So to me, the thing that that to deny what people do in the process of making wine, everything from growing grapes, right, choosing to plant, graft, vinifera vines onto non-vinifera rootstock, to plant it in a place, to grow it, to cultivate it, to train it and trellis it, to pick it, to make wine from it. All those things are human actions. And so what I found, I agree, there's a sort of gimmickry in this specific wine, brand. I don't deny that. Mm-hmm. But what I found refreshing was a sort of a recognition that wine is a human product, right? Mm-hmm. We make it. It's not, it is not, in the same way that, and to your point, Adam, and I agree with you, in the same way that bread is a human product. Bread doesn't, doesn't grow on trees. Mm-hmm. And in fact, like wine, the starting, even more so with bread, the starting raw material, wheat, takes a lot to get to the point where it's a delicious, sourdough loaf or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And so we would never think to say that a baker is not the most important person and agent in bread. Mm-hmm. Yes, the person growing the wheat matters, and maybe the quality of the wheat matters. I wish I had more opportunities in life to have artisanal wheat made into bread by skilled bakers. That would be delightful. Bread doesn't ship and store the way wine does, so I don't get as many chances to do that. But we would never deny the skill and the agency and the absolute necessity of a talented baker in giving you the highest expression of that wheat. And yet a lot of people in wine have really kind of sought to diminish the role of the winemaker, including winemakers themselves in some cases, which I really don't understand. But a lot of people outside of that have really sought to strip out the role of the winemaker.
Well, okay, I think to answer a quick question before I want to take this conversation to a crazy place.
Oh, let's go.
So the question I think is in terms of winemakers who diminish. I think a lot of winemakers at the end of the day are just like brewers. They're just like distillers. They just want to sell their fucking product, man. And if they think that right now what, the buyers want to hear is that it's all about the vineyard, they're going to fucking sit there and say it's all about the vineyard. You know what I mean? Like whatever you want to hear, so-and-so who's beverage director of this place, like I will tell you, like just buy my freaking wine so I can survive, right? But I do want to ask a larger question, which is, do you think that this movement comes because of the fact that we as a society have kind of become anti-education? Meaning that education has become expensive, right? It's astronomical. A lot of us have massive student debt. We then come out of college and a lot of us don't make salaries we can, that can help us pay off that debt pretty quickly, right? So we think we should be paid a lot more than we are paid. We have our generation, so millennials and then Gen Z, making less than our parents made at our ages, right? Mm-hmm. Which is crazy. Across the country, there's this sort of movement about either if education's not going to be free, then kind of fuck it, right? You have then the whole sort of VC world saying who even needs to go get an education, just start your business, right? So we have this whole movement that's sort of anti-expertise almost, right? Or anti-education to gain that expertise. And is that also kind of fueling everything? I don't know. It just seems we have to sort of think about where else we are getting messages in society, because I feel like I hear this happening even, when I hear people talk about certain fashion designers who are quote unquote self-made, and no one wants to think about whether or not those people maybe had apprenticeships, or artists who sort of, didn't get degrees, didn't get MFAs, etc. I don't know. It's interesting, as a thought experiment to think about whether this is a larger idea of us as a society just kind of turning against education. Joanna, I'm gonna you take this.
Yeah, respond to that, Joanna.
Process what you just said.
I like setting the bomb, letting it go off, and then being y'all discuss.
Yeah, I don't know. So you're saying that we now value like we don't value the craftsmanship?
No, I'm saying that like I think a lot of what's to become a lauded winemaker, a lot of those lauded winemakers have these degrees, right? So have we sort of turned away from the idea of the winemaker towards the site in large part because as a society we're kind of there are people in society who are sort of devaluing education because education has become so expensive. So for example, if we were to say that like the winemaker is really important and it's really important to be a successful winemaker to get a degree.
Right.
There's a lot of people in our society that could not afford to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Because education is insanely expensive. Right. And so if that is also the case, then is somewhat the discussion of the site as its own thing, a reaction to the fact that like, well, it's not just about like thinking about the romanticism of everything. It's also that, well, if I want to do this thing and I can't afford to gain the knowledge to do this thing, or to be poor as an apprentice to do this thing. So I'm just going to go do this thing and sort of tell a different story because I may not have the skill set right now, but I sure as hell don't have the money to get that skill set. So I'm just going to continue to fail as I learn.
Yeah, I guess I think that's a very valid point to make. I guess I just don't. I guess then as a result, we're turning towards highlighting terroir. Or is that not even a part of this argument?
I think that's why you turn to highlight terroir because you can't sort of lean on your own expertise because you don't really have it yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, I think there's probably two things happening here. One is definitely there is something to the idea that we are maybe it's not just education. I think expertise in general is being diminished in its sort of value societally, and some of that is good because sometimes I think expertise, as Adam said, is not equally available to all people. And some people, the barrier to gaining that expertise is very, very high for some people more than for others. And there are real broader societal issues with that. I also think there's another piece of this, which is that just learning how to do something in school does not mean that you will inherently be good at it or great at it on your own. That like winemaking is both science and art. And I think anyone who's good at it will tell you that, whatever their background is. And that, but it is true that I think we have seen a rejection of the science part of it, of the technical side of it in a lot of camps, not just the natural wine camp, frankly, or the diminishment of its importance. And I think that at the same time, what has also been going on is a lot of people recognizing maybe that there is an opportunity with clever branding, with a compelling story, personal story that might not be about your, winemaking credentials, say, or even maybe the source of your fruit, but is something else that you can kind of just skip over the learning to do it part, or you can, kind of learn to do it while doing it. And, frankly, the reality is because our understanding of winemaking and the science of it is much more complete than it used to be, you can read a book and probably not make something poisonous. You can make something that's drinkable and maybe you can make something that's even enjoyable to some people and consumable. And like, I guess what I would say is that I think that you're right, Adam, that there is a part of this that's just like a sort of a broader societal trend. But I also think there's something specific to wine, which is a very specific backlash against the idea of like kind of all great wine being made by a few people, which is kind of what it felt like for a while in, kind of in our, for all of us, kind of the early, if you're paying attention when we were kind of early on in our drinking age life. And now it's like, there's been this kind of, democratization, I suppose you would call it, of winemaking, but it does mean that there is sort of this, like, it has come at the, the denial of the importance, I think, at the denial of the importance of wine, of the winemaker and of the skill of winemaking in a way that is unfortunate for everyone, I think, because yes, you're right, Adam, that people want to be able to sell their product and maybe they don't care what the angle is, but in the end, I think it gives consumers an incorrect impression of what wine is, of how wine comes to be, how it makes it from the vineyard to your home or to the restaurant or whatever. And like, it is such a human endeavor, and that is part of its beauty. It is a synthesis of human technological prowess and of natural beauty. And that is I think, wonderful. And I would not want to deny either piece of that in talking about wine.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's very interesting, like all of it. You guys didn't really answer my question, so.
Well, I mean, excuse me for not having a sociology report ready for you. Jeez. Do your own homework, Adam.
Fine, Zach. But no, I think you're right. I mean, I think that it's unfortunate, and I agree that you with your analysis of like it's a little gimmicky, the way that this wine is marketing itself. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting to see that there are people who sort of are starting to say, hey, we'd like to be back in the spotlight a little bit. Like we'd like to talk about us as well. And I think it's both, right? It's site and person. Like it's not just the site. It's like, what does that person do with the site, and how do they understand the site? And I think, and then how do they want that site to be expressed? And, there may be really skilled winemakers who want that site to be expressed through the, sort of more, I don't know what we would say is traditional vein of winemaking, where it's much more about the purity of the fruit, etc. There might be other people who say, like, look, I like a little bit of Brett that enters the wine, or I kind of feel like that gives my wine's character, but that also wants to be known as the person behind that wine, mm-hmm. right? And wants to talk about like their perspective on why they did what they did, in the same way that like you want to hear from an artist in terms of like, okay, so like why did you do what you did on the canvas? Not just like it is what it is, and it was all the paint.
Yeah. I also just think, I don't know, with how people respond to chefs and things like that, like I wouldn't be surprised if consumers become increasingly curious about the people who are making their wine.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Well, Zach, Joanna, this was really interesting.
Yeah, let us know what you guys think. Yeah.
What's the email, Zach?
It's podcast@vinepair.com.
Yeah, man. Hit us up. Let us know. We want to hear what you think, and if anyone can answer my question, hit me up.
Yeah.
Hit me up. All right, I'll talk to you both next week.
Okay, take care.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much for listening to the VinePair podcast. If you love this show as much as we love making it, then please leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. It really helps everyone else discover the show. Now for the credits. VinePair is produced and recorded in New York City and Seattle, Washington by myself and Zach Jabal, who does all the editing and loves to get the credit. Also, I would love to give a special shout out to my VinePair co-founder, Josh Mallon, for helping make all this possible, and also to Keith Beavers, VinePair Tastings Director, who is additionally a producer on this show. I also want to, of course, thank every other member of the VinePair team who are instrumental in all of the ideas that go into making this show every week. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again.